Well, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us for this weekend edition of Hebrew Word Study. Coming a day late, it's Monday, but hopefully you'll be okay and you'll enjoy the topic and lesson we're going through. We are in 2 Samuel chapter 6 and verse 8. And if you remember 2 weeks ago when we to the previous verse, this was the time when David had gathered 30,000 choice men to worship with all various types of instruments. They put the ark on a cart pulled by some oxen. The oxen, whatever happened, the cart started to shake, and a guy named Uzzah put his hand out to try to steady it, and he was smitten and struck down. And it had said that the anger of the Lord broke out upon Uzzah, and of course we went through that understanding. I find it interesting as we start verse 8 here that the same word that was used for God being angry is used here by David being angry. It's vayachar, and you'll see that kind of highlighting it here. The has the vav conjunction and then the yod chet resh. So if we look back at the previous verse, we see in verse 7 that this same word, the with the vav conjunction, has the yod chet resh of being aroused. Now, what's interesting here is, as this was relating in verse 7, is by Yahar Af, and aroused was the anger, has the aleph and the pei sofit. We talked about the nose of the camel flaring and so forth, but that part is missing from David's episode here where it says Vayichar le David, and it just says, and David became, and it puts in angry. But again, the previous verse didn't translate that as anger. It just means to have an emotion. It means to have something flare up within you, but it wasn't to the same extent or like what happened in the previous verse of what the emotion God was expressing. So I find that kind of interesting, kind of a parallel, but yet different. David's emotion is different. Um, you could say he became frustrated, but that frustration didn't lead to the same type of action or emotion that was displayed by God in verse 7. So I thought that was very interesting. So, and then al asher Paretz. This is kind of an interesting word. This word paretz is translated as outbreak, and then you'll see it shows up right after the word Yahweh again, the same word with a little bit of different vowel vocalization on it, but it's still the same letters of Pei, Resh, Sadi, Sofit. And so there's a outbreak, a breach against Uzzah, and so they called the name of this place Perez Uzzah. Um, this word happened to resonate with me because I had just finished reading Genesis 38, and there's a story there that's very fascinating about a lady named Tamar who is having twins impregnated by Judah, one of the sons of Jacob slash Israel. And as these children, two boys were coming forth, there was one of them who stuck his hand out and they tied a red cord around it to indicate the firstborn. But then the child withdrew his hand and his brother came out. And so his name was also called Perez. And so I needed to check back at this and just compare and try to see if there's any connection whatsoever, because it's a very interesting term. And it's strange that they would call their name after that term. You'll see here that in verse 29, it has the Pei Resh Sadi Sofit, Perez, and they call his name Perez. And up here is a different form, but it's the Pei Resh Sadi Sofit with a Comets Tav ending for the second masculine singular verb root. So anyway, you didn't need to know all that. But anyway, that's why the different letters are at the end. It has to do with the identification of the masculine um, form of the word. So I just thought that was very interesting to see this word Perez here. And so they called the name of the place Perez Uzzah, or the breaching or breaking forth of God's emotion. And then what's also somewhat interesting here is the end of this verse says that it's called this Ad Hayom Hazeh, to this day. This is kind of a marker, and again, just trying to show the nuances in the Hebrew that maybe we miss. But this, if this was happening real time and this was being recorded real time, you wouldn't have the word "it's still called this to this day." So this is somewhat of an indicator showing that this writing had been taken and occurred some quite while after. Why would you call something that is still called this to this day if it was in the present time? Um, it would indicate that some time had passed from the occurrence until the time when this was written down. So just a little bit of nuances that you can look for and sometimes be aware to just give you a little bit of better understanding. So moving on to the next verse, obviously David didn't like what happened here. And in verse 9, it says, Vayira David, and it has the Ra word in front, translated as he was afraid. Now, again, fear in the Bible is a very challenging topic to deal with. Um, the way some translations are created, especially those that were done in the 1500s, 1600s, fear to that time frame and those that culture, it was different than what we maybe understand fear to be today. And so, if you will talk to people who are native Hebrew speakers, um, Jewish people who study the Old Testament, they have a very different understanding of this word Yahweh than we do. They will more often than not translate this as respect or reverence rather than fear. And of course, yes, fear is based upon respect and reverence. But again, when we're looking at that, God is the same yesterday, today, and forevermore, and that the God of the New Testament is the same as the God of the Old Testament, the, God didn't change and suddenly become a God of love and mercy in the New Testament and, was totally different in the Old Testament. And Jewish scholars are very quick to point that out, that that's a misconception that I would say that traditional Christianity is that, God was vengeful, wrathful, angry, just was mean throughout the Old Testament, but then in the New Testament, now he's the God of love and mercy and grace. And they will say, well, God doesn't change. And we know that. We quote those scriptures that, God is the same today, yesterday, and forevermore. So maybe it's our understanding and our cultural interpretation and translation of some of these words that give us maybe a bad taste for the Hebrew writings or Old Testament, if we want to call it that. And so I look for those and try to point those out because it has given me a very different understanding and actually helped me in my relationship with God to understand that God has emotions, which is where we get our emotions from. And every emotion that we feel was given to us by God. And this, you have to remember, is both masculine and feminine. Male and female were both created in the image of God. So every emotion and feeling that I have going through me as a man, God has. But every emotion and feeling that a woman has is also the same as what God has. And as God feels these emotions, I believe a woman can relate to some of these emotions even better than a man can because emotions run different in a woman than in a man. But yet, are there times here when maybe we see God's emotions that are closer aligned to the feminine attributes that he's given to a woman than maybe the masculine attributes that he's given to a man. And so if we think of that and think of how God could have been feeling when he's betrayed, when he's been cheated on, and those emotions of mistrust and those emotions of having your heart broken is probably the best way to say it. Emotions of having his heart broken and having a betrayal and feeling those emotions, God has them. And I believe we see them come out in the verses of Scripture here because they are very real. It's the same way that a woman would feel if she found out that her husband was unfaithful to her. Is she angry? Yes, but anger does not encompass all of those emotions. There's bitterness, there's resentment, there's worry, there's dread, there's fear for how she's going to take care of the rest, how she's going to be cared for, how, if there are children involved, what's going to happen with the kids, how they're going to feel about the situation. Will it lead to a divorce? Will it lead to reconciliation? All of those feelings that she will feel here cannot be just summed up with one word. You could say, yes, she's angry, but it certainly doesn't encompass all of the deep-seated emotions and the reactions that she would have while she's processing this and while she's grieving with the hurt that's been ascribed and dealt to her. Think of that when you see the word angry in the Bible talking about God. Look at, was his heart broken? Was he betrayed? Were his people unfaithful to him? And because of his great love for them, it's only natural that he's going to feel betrayal. He's going to feel those things. If we feel them, we have to understand that God has the ability to feel them also because he gave us those attributes. And so David here, I believe, is talking about a respect and a reverence that he had. He wasn't afraid and, not wanting to talk to God anymore, not wanting to be in his presence, not wanting to approach him. He just said, what am I going to do now? And he did express a little bit of, how can the ark of God come to me? David was in a state of not understanding, of he did not have the right information. He did not look in the right place to find out how the ark of God should be moved. And so he's regrouping. He's coming back and saying, I need a little bit of time. I need a time out here. I need some time to recover. I need some time to heal. I need some time to figure this out. And that's what we see here in verse 9, because he's not talking. I think the verbiage is interesting here that David is Vayirah, and he was in respect of not Elohim, not the judgmental wrath, justice side of God. He mentions Yahweh. He mentions the compassionate, merciful side of God. Well, sometimes it's hard to see the compassionate, merciful side of God when tragedy happens, when things occur that here was a loss of life of Uzzah. David's plans didn't go as he had hoped for. Things had changed. David's in complete disarray because he doesn't know what to do, but he still knows that the compassionate, merciful side of God was in play here. God could have killed all of them. All of them could have lost their lives. David could have, because he was the one who set this all up. He was the one who told him to take a cart. You know, uh, he was more at fault than any of them. So he was here looking at that God spared him, possibly, and that he saw God's mercy. And so I think that's where we're going to stop today. Just a little insight, and hopefully the seeing that there is other ways to look at the translation of these Hebrew words that can give us a better understanding of the nature of God and allow us to feel closer to Him and be able to relate to Him more is where I find the beauty of all of this. So thanks so much for listening. God bless you. Have a good rest of your week, and hopefully we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.